Chapter 2, Home Among the Relics. Dad, what was that all about? And don't tell me nothing, because I heard you two loud and clear from the office. She crossed her arms in the doorway to the office, shooting her dad a look of disdain as he sat in his favorite ratty chair, surrounded by piles of books, tapestries, and countless other historical offerings. Zella, my dear, some mysteries of man are just not yours to solve. This isn't one of your puzzles or Sherlock Holmes tales you love so much. This is a real person's life we're talking about. Right. And the way you intentionally baited that guy was, what, an accident? She rolled her oversized sleeves and still staring at the man who taught her everything she knew and loved. I don't know what you mean. I merely greeted the man and gave him condolences for his loss. He rocked back in his chair, tilting his head to focus through his glasses. Oh, please, save your intellectual sleight of hand for someone who doesn't know you. You wanted him to ask those questions, and apparently you knew it would upset him. So the question remains, what are you up to, old man? She asked, squinting at him hard. Don't call me old man. I'm your father, and you'll treat me with respect, young lady. Classic deflection. Sloppily played, might I add. Just level with me, please. You let on that his grandmother kept something from him, and then, when he read the inscription, he shut down, mumbled something about being lied to, and promptly darted for the door like he'd seen a ghost. What aren't you telling me? Her dad sighed, offered her a smile, and swiveled to face the computer. I see. This is real rich coming from the guy who intentionally dragged me into the middle of whatever this is. She motioned generally to the room. Zella, Zella, Zella. There is much in life you've yet to comprehend. You've spent the last 5 years since my accident, cooped up in the shop, passing on every teaching position offered to you, and every opportunity to get out of here. You'll be surprised to know that even a doctorate in archaeology doesn't qualify you for matters of old hearts and faraway places, let alone to meddle in the family ties of their descendants. Some mysteries must unfold in their due time, as the story itself is told. She tensed her jaw as she processed the cryptic words, unable to muster an immediate rebuttal. Her whole life this man saw fit to mask meaning in vague riddles and metaphor. Only on the rarest of occasions did he ever seem to just say what he meant in earnest. Though she'd grown accustomed to his ways, the game still managed to infuriate her from time to time. Fine, father. If you don't want to tell me, I guess I'll just have to figure it out on my own. She slinked out of the entryway, holding a stern eye on the man who wouldn't even turn to face her. Out of sight, Zella returned to the books Mr. Douglas had left behind, losing herself in the history of the worn pages and bindings. 20 or so minutes later, the offerings were sorted and displayed in the glass case under the register. Not wanting to forget, she retallied the totals owed to the guy and set aside his money under the till in an envelope with his name on it, Erik Douglas. She may not have cared for the guy's sarcastic tone or his lack of anything resembling wit, but she did feel bad for the guy. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar clacking of her dad's walker. Z, recent disagreement aside, you seem to take a liking to our Mr. Douglas, no? Her scoff nearly turned into a full-on choke as her father busied himself with random items on the shelves behind her. Excuse me? Where did that come from, Dad? She cast a glare over the shoulder. You go too far with your wild suppositions. You know, for a self-proclaimed academic, you seem to have no issue whipping up conspiracies where I'm concerned. Even an old, hopeless romantic like you should know better than to confuse 5 seconds of sympathy with something else. I happen to find the man to be quite crass and a bit full of himself. The ass called me a feral librarian. Who does that? She paused, seeing his dirty, smug face grin as he insulted her. His brown eyes mocked her even in the memory. Her gut turned at the thought of lowering her bar to engage in verbal jousting with an atypical heathen such as him. Dear, it's been a long time since I've seen you at a loss for words. Take that as you will. Dad, for the love of God, please stop. Zella smacked the display case hard enough to bounce the pins off the edge. Why did he have to be so persistent about this? Listen, Z, I don't mean to pressure you, but I can't help but feel like I'm the one responsible for your lack of a life. I appreciate everything you've done since you know, and you've done a fine job taking over the shop, but don't you think that you're missing out, my dear? 7 years spent on a PhD, and the last time you were in the field was for your dissertation. 5 years ago. Don't you get it? Yeah, you needed me, so I'm here. It's really that simple. I don't regret a thing. Oh, hogwash. You stopped living for yourself. My daughter, the one who accompanied me on countless digs, excursions, and adventures all over the world, has become relegated to an observer, stuck inside these modern sheetrocked walls. The whole point of being alive is to participate. Instead of using your expertise to enrich the world out there, you've decided to hunker down and wear your knowledge like a shield of armor, safe in your little castle of trinkets and history. She stared at the jewelry box in front of her, increasing the intensity of her gaze as each word he offered landed its blow. Guilt filled her. She wanted so desperately to be out in the world, continuing to chase the passions of her early youth, but to do so would be turning the back on the man that had given her so much. You make it sound so easy. Even if I could, leaving would just doom this place. I can't let everything you worked for fall apart, Dad. The thought of it alone hurts. Zella spun to find her father halfway to where she stood. She hastily pulled the man into a hug, resting her head on his shoulder. Gentle tears welled in her eyes. That's where you're wrong, my dear. There's no need for you to fall on your sword like your heroes from history. This place was my dream, not yours. It's high time you stopped living for your old man's and set off to find your own. That's all I ever wanted for you. It's why I dragged you along all those years and gifted you a passion for discovery and adventure as a child. But here you are, 33 years old and practically a prisoner of your own making. It doesn't have to be today or even tomorrow, but it's time you blazed your own trail and started living for you. The tears soaked through the fabric on his shoulder, but she didn't have the strength to stop. He was right on all accounts. Years of playing it safe had lulled her into a false sense of narrow contentment. Dad? Yes, Z. Why do you have to be so wise? It's kind of annoying, you know. She chuckled along with him, smiling through her tears. I want to live life, you know that. I'm still the same girl who visited her 100th country before the age of 16, but I had you to guide and help me along the way. This is completely different. I don't know who I am alone, I guess. I'm afraid. Ha! Don't give me too much credit. I'm only wise where mistakes are concerned. You have to live it to learn it, as they say. All I can tell you is, a person with a purpose has little room for doubt. She pulled her head from his shoulder, looking him in the eye as she wiped her face with her sleeve. You could put that on a t-shirt and make millions. She laughed at her grinning father. He could spit wise one-liners like a damn fortune cookie factory sometimes. Hell, my dear, where do you think I got it from? Their laughter carried on for what seemed like minutes before they finally settled back down. This concludes the end of Chapter 2. Please stand by for Chapter 3. Chapter 3, The Land of Heathens. The final few hours of the day passed without much affair. She danced away to the tunes from the antique Wurlitzer jukebox as she dusted and tidied the storefront. The takeaways from the earlier talk with her dad played through her mind. At first, her ego screamed to play it safe and remain hidden away. Just another 10 years or so, and she'd never have to worry about finding a partner or putting herself out into the world in any kind of exposed way. God, it would be so easy to drift off into the annals of history along with her collection. Surprisingly, the smile at the initial thought faded as her conscience and her dad's voice chipped away at her cowardice. By closing time that evening, any doubts about what she needed to do had been quelled and set ablaze on the mental Viking pyre of truth. She didn't worry herself with what exactly came next. Getting too specific would only hinder the potential progress, but she did resign herself to say yes to the world going forward, and let come what may, outcome be damned. Despite the fear to leave the comfort of her cozy confines, her inner drive to return to her former glory beat within. Every ounce of her ego tugged at her to remain where she was, but she readied to fight it when it decided to rear its ugly head. Her dad left a few hours ago, reminding her to grab the deliveries on the way out. Living in such a small town like Valestown had its perks, but the locals expecting everyone to hand deliver on a regular basis wasn't one of them. Somehow, the town felt 1,000,000 miles away from civilization, but in reality sat just shy of an hour commute away from Baltimore. She grabbed her keys, then scooped the pile next to the register. The post-it note he'd left behind said 2 stops, both out of the way of their rural farmhouse. One address belonged to a regular, Connor, who routinely bought, sold, and traded at the shop. The other seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it offhand. Great, might as well add another half an hour to a 5-minute commute, she thought. Locking the door behind her, the early autumn air swirled around the bare skin of her calves. It wasn't cold enough to warrant a shiver, but the signs of a fading Indian summer permeated the quaint little 2-stoplight town. September in Maryland tended to be a crapshoot as far as the weather was concerned. Up and down Main Street, townsfolk went about their business, coming and going from the multitude of common-walled buildings. The bakery next door had long since closed for the day, but it didn't stop a few kids from gawking at the pastries on display through the glass. The sun wouldn't set for another 2 hours, so it was no surprise the school-aged kids would be out soaking up what little remnants of summer that remained. She loved it here, and it reminded her of quaint little villages across Europe, and the architecture echoed the early years of the original colonies. She slid into the seat of her used hunter green Civic, situated her tote and the deliveries in the passenger seat, and clipped the mass of her hair out of her eyes. Before long, she was miles into her trip towards Connor's place, located 10 minutes to the west of town, singing out loud to the latest Pearl Jam CD. The rolling forested hills of the lower Appalachia intermixed with centuries-old homesteads and farmland. She never tired of the scenery out here, loving the classic red barns with white trim and the smattering of historically significant timber-frame structures built in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Anywhere further west in the U.S. was just flat-out too new for her taste. Remembering from last time, she noticed the large silver windmill just off Owen Mills Road, slowing down along the curve until she came to a stop at the mailbox. Grabbing the appropriate envelope, she hopped out, checked for traffic, then crossed the road. As she closed the custom barn-styled mailbox, she shielded her eyes from the sun, taking in the sprawling wooded estate grounds cascading up the hill. The house wasn't visible through all the foliage, but judging by the amount of care taken with the decorative gate in the driveway, she figured it had to be worth millions. You'd know it if you met Connor. The braggart of a man was apparently loaded. Must be nice, she thought. Eager to get to the last delivery over and done with, she headed for her car on the other side of the curve. Trees walled visibility in either direction, leaving only a few hundred feet of open road to the naked eye. Satisfied, Zella trotted across the 2 lanes and quickly slipped in as she shut the door behind her. Okay, here we go, she said to herself, cranking up the music and then checking in her rearview mirror. She sang along to the CD as she pulled away from the shoulder. Suddenly, a roar cut through the music, nearly stopping her heart. Shit! She screamed instinctively, slamming the brakes, tossing everything into the floor as a white truck swerved just in time, missing her by inches. There she sat, chest heaving like she just ran a marathon. Eddie Vedder blaring at the top of his lungs as she watched the beat-up white truck disappear around the corner. Motherfucker! Zella surveyed the disaster in her floorboard, thankful she wasn't drinking coffee at the time. Rather than pick up then, her nerves demanded she move off the dangerous curve and deal with it at her next stop. Checking and triple-checking, Zella managed to get back up to speed, this time in absolute silence and the windows down. According to the post-it note, the other delivery should be ahead, no more than a mile on the right. Less than a minute later, her Honda pulled into the Williams farm, denoted by the sign out front. It was against her dad's policy to leave money in a mailbox unless requested by the person, which meant she had to knock. That's just great, she said to herself, getting out. The place wasn't new or opulent by any stretch of the imagination, but it was cared for. Probably turn of the century, but the white paint couldn't be more than a few years old. Vintage split-rail fencing separated the single-track farm road from the main area of the farm, and an old 19th century steel-wheeled tractor that sat partially restored to the side of the house, highlighting a manicured flower bed. She took a few minutes to tidy up everything on the passenger side, gathered the Williams farm envelope, and headed up the stairs to the wraparound porch. Zella knocked. Waiting, her eyes wandered across the details of the place. The ornate scrollwork on the ironwork of the door alone were enough to make any history buff giddy. She smiled at the lion's head, probably made in a forge on the property 100 years ago. Forged rose-head nails adorned the door, a feature that once denoted the wealth of the homeowner. One feature led to another, and before she realized it, she was examining the scarf joints connecting the beams that held up the porch. Her specialty didn't tell her much about such things, but she was all too familiar with the history of this type of construction. The door clicked, putting an end to her nerding out on the architecture. A soft voice greeted her from a man, most likely in his 80s. "Hello there. What can I do for you, miss?" He gave her a warm smile. "Yes, my name is Zella, and I have a delivery from Teddy's Antiques and Rarities for the Williams farm." She offered the elderly man the envelope. He opened it with a haste reserved for a sloth. Negotiating the $100 bills, the man pulled free the slip of paper and held it away from his face to read it. "Everything seemed to be in order?" she asked, crossing her arms to shield herself from the cooler breeze of the impending evening. "Interesting," the man offered, smiling at the message. "I will say you're in the ballpark, Miss Grimsby, but not quite there just yet." That was odd. How did this guy know who she was? And by all accounts, she was at the Williams farm. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm confused. This is the Williams farm, correct?" "Indeed it is, but this delivery actually goes to the house out back. Just follow the old single track until you see it." He motioned to the side of the house and then pocketed the piece of paper before returning the envelope to her. "Oh, my mistake, sir. My dad was quite vague with his directions, as usual." She shook the man's head and headed for the stairs before stopping and spinning on a dime. "Excuse me, if you don't mind asking, how did you know my last name?" The old man turned halfway into the house. "Oh, I see. Everyone knows Teddy, and I put two and two together. Just figured you were his daughter or granddaughter." He gave a nod and disappeared into the house. "Fair enough, I guess," she said to herself, climbing back into her car. About 1,000 feet down the crunchy white gravel of the single track, a small barn-like structure poked through the trees. Tired halves of oak whiskey barrels lined the driveway leading the way, spilling over with the late season blooms intermixed with mums just starting to bud. The trees overhead had been groomed to create a canopy of sorts, creating a green tunnel some 20 feet high. She smiled to herself at the beauty of such a place. It perfectly towed the line between manicured and unkept natural forms. Pulling into the bordered turnaround in front of the cottage-sized house, the craftsmanship drew her eyes. Whimsical shutters framed the two windows, tying tastefully to the alyssum-filled window boxes that hung underneath. Boxwood hedges flowed to either side of the fire-charred hardwood door. A winding path, escorted by shade-loving Hollis, meandered from the drive to the richly stained porch. She grinned ear to ear as she exited the vehicle. Everywhere she pointed her eyes, another feast for the senses awaited. Smells of lingering lavender and earth mixed with thyme carried on the gentle breeze. Accentuating the entry to the path, a trellis boasted masses of morning glory threatening to engulf her whole. Stepping on to the small porch, she finally noticed the house itself. The classic white clapboard siding transitioned into the ivy that creeped up onto the corners of the house. Whoever lived here had taste and a green thumb. That much she knew for sure. Zella used the forged knocker, rapping on the heavy stained door. Waiting, envelope in hand, she tempted fate by sneaking a peek through the window and quickly repositioned herself, anxious not to get caught snooping. After 20 seconds or so, she tried again, this time with more gusto. "Hello? Anybody home?" she called, stepping back from the doorway. Not wanting to waste the trip out, her legs carried her to the end of the porch, to the second set of steps that appeared to lead to the side and back of the house. "Is anyone home? I have a delivery from Teddy's." A decorative curved-top picket fence intersected with the side of the house just off the stairs. In for a penny, in for a pound, she thought, approaching the smaller of the two gates. Detailed with handmade hinge work and hardware. She stopped mid-step, a noise from the back catching her attention. "Hello? I'm supposed to drop this off." Her heart beat loudly in her chest. "Easy there, Zella. Why are we getting so worked up?" "Come on back." She was startled at the sudden sound of the voice from the back of the fenced property. "Oh, dear God," she muttered under her breath, trying to poise herself before continuing. "Okay, I'll be right there." Returning to a calm state, she lifted the handle on the walk-through gate and casually made her way inside. Her mouth fell agape at the sight. The back of the cottage trumped the front in dramatic fashion. Arbors, pergolas, and a maze of pots and beds dotted the lush landscaping. An equally impressive barn was situated at the far end of the acre-sized yard, complete with an amply large chicken coop on one side. Between the pergola entertaining area and the barn, a gated vegetable garden spilled over with fruits, veggies, and a smattering of flowered rose. She'd died and gone to heaven. Well, somebody's heaven. She could barely fathom the amount of work and care it required to upkeep such a needin. "Wait there," the vaguely familiar voice said from somewhere beyond the garden. Wait, what? She thought, as her eyeline caught the gravel drive and followed it to where it ended. Her teeth mashed together and her smile vanished. There, sitting in the far corner of the yard, sat the exact white truck that nearly killed her just a few minutes ago. "Hello again. I didn't expect to see you again so soon." She turned, red-faced, locking eyes with none other than Erik fucking Douglas, mocking her with a sheepish grin and a tank top covered with sweat. This concludes Chapter 2 and 3 of The Lost Rose of Inverness. Tune in next time for the continuation of our story. And thanks again. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends.